Graduation day was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. 4 years of sleepless nights, side jobs, buried panic attacks, and endless sacrifice had all led to this. I walked across that stage with a degree in business analytics, clutched in my shaking hands, and a GPA that should have earned at least one tear of joy from my family. But my dad didn't even clap. He sat stiff in his chair, arms crossed, lips tight. Beside him, my mother adjusted her necklace and whispered something about how this whole thing was overhyped. And my brother? He didn't even show up. He was too busy prepping for his big promotion at the tech company Dad got him into right after high school. No degree, no effort, just nepotism and charm. At dinner that night, I tried to keep my expectations low. I wasn't looking for a banner or a cake, just a "we're proud of you." Instead, over lukewarm pasta and forced smiles, my dad raised his glass and said, "To Ethan, he just got promoted to senior product manager. That's real success." Then, with a smirk, he added, "No offense, honey, but degrees don't mean much in the real world. It's results that count." The entire table laughed. I felt like I had been slapped in the chest. My fork clinked against the plate, untouched. That night, I packed my things. I didn't make a dramatic scene. I didn't yell or cry. I just quietly folded the graduation robe they never complimented, zipped up my worn suitcase, and left a note that read, "Thanks for dinner." I moved into a shared apartment with peeling wallpaper, and the scent of someone else's regrets soaked into the carpet. I took freelance gigs analyzing small business trends, building dashboards, writing market reports, anything to keep the lights on. While Ethan posted selfies in boardrooms and Dad shared articles about how to succeed without college, I buried myself in data, strategy, and building something no one could ignore. I worked in silence for 2 years. And then I got my first big contract. It wasn't just any company. It was an emerging tech startup that needed someone to overhaul their analytics system. The CEO took a chance on me, and I didn't waste it. I streamlined their process, tripled their growth within 6 months, and stayed humble while they passed around bonuses. But that was just the beginning. One day, the CEO leaned across the table and said, "I'm starting a new firm. I want you to be my partner." That's when everything shifted. Suddenly, the girl with just a degree was in boardrooms, shaking hands with executives my father worshipped from afar. Suddenly, I wasn't just building reports. I was building empires, quietly, methodically. And one name caught my eye on the applicant list for a middle manager role at our new company. Ethan, I hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, but there was his resume, filled with buzzwords and job hopping. Apparently, things hadn't worked out at his previous job. Something about poor performance. I didn't reject him. I forwarded his resume to our head of people and said, "Let's schedule an interview. I want to be in the room." The interview was scheduled for Monday. I didn't tell them who I was, not yet. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to see if he'd recognize me without the family filter. The girl he once called the backup child was now the decision maker. When he walked into the sleek class office, wearing an ill-fitting suit and a too confident grin, he scanned the room and then stopped. His eyes met mine, and for a second, confusion clouded his expression. Then realization hit. He stammered, You're on the board?" I smiled politely. "I co-own the firm." Silence. He shifted in his chair, visibly sweating now. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't need to. I asked standard questions. I listened to him try to spin his failures into team learning moments. But behind my calm demeanor, every word he fumbled was a quiet victory. Every pause was a piece of dignity returned to me. Dignity they had stolen year after year. When the interview ended, I shook his hand and said, "We'll be in touch." He left pale. That night, I got a text from my dad. "Ethan says you're in charge now. That true?" I replied, I'm not just in charge. I signed his rejection. He called me. I let it ring. The next day, I had a floral arrangement sent to my parents' house. Sunflowers, my favorite, the ones they never remembered on birthdays. Tucked in between the petals was a card. From your daughter, with the useless degree. I heard through a mutual friend that Dad sat in stunned silence for an hour after reading it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten child. I felt like the storm they never saw coming. I didn't plan on revenge when I started building my business. I just wanted to prove I was more than the family's silent disappointment. More than the girl who got straight A's only to hear, "That's nice, but your brother made the varsity team." I worked in coffee shops, slept on air mattresses, spent nights crying into my laptop trying to learn financial law while my brother bought his second car. Funded, of course, by the same man who told me I wasn't executive material. But success has a way of sharpening memory. Every time I got overlooked, I built. Every time I got mocked, I planned. And every time my father said my degree was just a paper trophy, I reminded myself that the paper he worshipped came in contracts, and I now wrote them. The company I co-founded with a college friend wasn't loud. We weren't flashy, but we were smart. We bought up struggling competitors, trained quiet talent, and expanded methodically. While my family celebrated my brother's quarterly sales bonuses, I was negotiating buyouts and learning how the old boys club protected each other. My father never noticed. He never asked. Until one day, I bought a firm where my brother's best friend was a mid-tier executive. Suddenly, whispers reached home. "Isn't that your daughter's name on the deal?" my uncle asked during a family dinner. My mother dismissed it. "Probably a typo." It wasn't. At Thanksgiving, they toasted my brother's recent promotion, something about regional expansion lead. Everyone clapped. My father raised his glass and said, "Proud of you, son, real leadership, not like that academic stuff." He didn't even look at me. I was sitting right there. So I smiled and said nothing, because a week later, I closed on the acquisition of a boutique firm where his own boss had just jumped ship. And guess who signed his new employment contract? Me. The man who used to treat my father like a king now called me ma'am in meetings. My dad didn't know yet. He still thought his world was intact. But storms don't announce themselves with lightning. They come quietly, in shifts of wind, in pressure you can't see but feel in your bones. And I was about to make landfall. I didn't plan on revenge when I started building my business. I just wanted to prove I was more than the family's silent disappointment, more than the girl who got straight A's only to hear, "That's nice, but your brother made the varsity team." I worked in coffee shops, slept on air mattresses, spent nights crying into my laptop trying to learn financial law while my brother bought his second car. Funded, of course, by the same man who told me I wasn't executive material. But success has a way of sharpening memory. Every time I got overlooked, I built. Every time I got mocked, I planned. And every time my father said my degree was just a paper trophy, I reminded myself that the paper he worshipped came in contracts. And I now wrote them. The company I co-founded with a college friend wasn't loud. We weren't flashy, but we were smart. We bought up struggling competitors, trained quiet talent, and expanded methodically. While my family celebrated my brother's quarterly sales bonuses, I was negotiating buyouts and learning how the old boys club protected each other. My father never noticed. He never asked. Until one day, I bought a firm where my brother's best friend was a mid-tier executive. Suddenly, whispers reached home. "Isn't that your daughter's name on the deal?" my uncle asked during a family dinner. My mother dismissed it. Probably a typo. It wasn't. At Thanksgiving, they toasted my brother's recent promotion, something about regional expansion lead. Everyone clapped. My father raised his glass and said, "Proud of you, son, real leadership, not like that academic stuff." He didn't even look at me. I was sitting right there. So I smiled and said nothing, because a week later, I closed on the acquisition of a boutique firm where his own boss had just jumped ship. And guess who signed his new employment contract? Me. The man who used to treat my father like a king now called me ma'am in meetings. My dad didn't know yet. He still thought his world was intact. But storms don't announce themselves with lightning. They come quietly, in shifts of wind, in pressure you can't see but feel in your bones. And I was about to make landfall. What they didn't know was that my business wasn't just profitable. It was influential. We were building tech for financial audits, and our software had started being quietly adopted in corporate governance. I had access now. Access to files, names, records. My brother's firm. Let's just say it wasn't as clean as they pretended to be. Neither was my father's retirement fund. One evening, my father joked over dinner, "You better marry someone rich, since you spent all that time in school." I just smiled again, imagining the boardroom where his fate would be discussed in the next quarter. I already knew what they'd decide, because I would be in the room, and he wouldn't. He told me my degree meant nothing, but soon it would be the reason he lost everything he thought mattered. The official call came on a Monday morning. My father was on his usual morning walk when his phone rang, an unfamiliar HR number. The company was restructuring, they told him. There would be a round of internal efficiency optimization. He was being retired early, effective immediately. No farewell party, no gold watch, just a legal document and a link to a severance package. He was stunned. He thought it was a joke. For 32 years, he was the face of loyalty and control in that firm. Now he was erased with a single phone call. He called my mother in a panic. "They kicked me out," he whispered, like the words betrayed him. "They replaced me." I sat across from her at the breakfast cafe when the call came in. I watched her pale as she held the phone away from her ear, her mouth slightly open. "They what?" she said, barely above a breath. I sipped my coffee. I didn't say a word. It was only days later that the pieces started clicking. My brother, ever the smug center of attention, visited our parents with takeout and arrogance. "You know the industry's changing," he said, trying to sound wise. "Old dogs, new tricks, you know how it is." But he didn't know what I knew. That his own department had been flagged in one of our algorithmic audits. That his recent promotion came with perks built on sketchy vendor contracts and numbers that didn't quite line up. That the next quarterly audit would accidentally trigger a deeper review. And that when it did, it would be me signing the green light. I didn't do it for vengeance. Not at first. But the silence I'd swallowed all these years had turned acidic. My family had made me invisible in every photo, every conversation, every memory that mattered. And now I had the power to make them watch me without looking away. The moment of reveal came during a company gala. I walked in, not as someone's +1, not as someone's daughter, but as the keynote speaker. I wore a black tailored suit, hair swept back, and heels that clicked with purpose on the marble floor. My name was on the brochure, but I knew they hadn't read it. My father came with a former colleague. My brother was there, laughing near the open bar. When I stepped up to the stage and the spotlight hit me, I scanned the crowd and found their faces, frozen, pale. My father leaned forward like his eyes betrayed him. My brother dropped his glass. "Tonight," I began, "we celebrate not only innovation but resilience, the kind that grows in silence, in dismissal, in rooms where no one thinks you're worth listening to. Tonight, I thank those who underestimated me, because they taught me how to rise without applause." The applause that followed wasn't just for my speech. It was the sound of an empire shifting. As the crowd continued clapping, I spotted my father shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The man who once told me to stick to secretarial dreams now sat in stunned silence while his unremarkable daughter held the mic with the world listening. I saw the flicker in his eyes, the battle between pride and ego. But it wasn't pride for me. It was horror at what he had missed, at what he had dismissed. I closed my speech with a final line I had rehearsed 1,000 times. "The best revenge," I said, "is never cruelty. It's excellence. Quiet, undeniable excellence." I bowed slightly and stepped away from the podium. The spotlight faded, but my fire didn't. After the event, people lined up to speak to me. Executives, analysts, interns, even security, all congratulating me, asking about the vision. None of them saw me as anyone's daughter or sister. I was just me. Finally, when I turned the corner backstage, I ran into my father. He opened his mouth, probably to reclaim some dignity. "You said my degree meant nothing?" I said before he could finish. "Turns out it meant the key to your entire career." He looked gutted. "I didn't know you were her." "I've always been her. You just chose not to see it." My brother appeared behind him. "What the hell, Eliza?" he spat, his voice shaking. "You set me up." "No," I said with perfect calm. "You set yourself up. I just stopped protecting you." He stormed off, muttering about betrayal. My father remained. For the first time in my life, he looked small, shrinking into the suit that once made him feel powerful. "You'll regret this," he said weakly. "I already regretted waiting this long," I replied. He turned and walked away, but I didn't watch him go. I had more important people to greet, more important futures to build, ones that didn't rely on someone else's approval. Because finally, I wasn't the girl begging to be taken seriously. I was the woman they couldn't ignore, even if they tried. After the gala, I didn't return to my apartment. I went to my new office, the one with glass walls and my name etched in chrome. Eliza Winters, founder and CEO. It still felt surreal, even though every sleepless night, every doubted decision, every dismissed idea had led me here. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the city skyline, replaying everything. Not just the insults and put-downs, but the silence. The way my father never invited me to his office functions, while my brother practically had his own keycard. The way he introduced my brother as a rising star, and me as just helping out with paperwork. But now my company was making headlines, and my father's was trying not to bleed out. The acquisition offer I had made, it wasn't just a buyout, it was a rescue. See, after I quietly hired his boss, Mr. Kendrick, a man who was more than willing to jump ship once he saw what we were building, I got access to everything. Their weaknesses, liabilities, their toxic employee culture. Kendrick didn't just leave, he flipped, and with him came 3 major clients and a pipeline of information my father never saw coming. He called me that night. "Eliza," he began, his voice stiff with forced politeness. "I think we need to talk." "You mean negotiate," I replied. A long pause. "You always were sharper than we gave you credit for." "That's your first honest sentence in years," he sighed. "This is business, Eliza. Family shouldn't mix with—" "Oh, now you remember I'm family?" He went quiet. I let the silence burn before continuing. "Here's what I propose. I acquire your company. I let you keep a ceremonial position, some cushy title so you don't lose face. You show up for ribbon cuttings and quarterly photos. That's it. You'll have no say in operations, no decision-making power, just a nameplate and a paycheck." His voice turned cold. "That's insulting." "No, Dad," I said softly. "What's insulting is being told your degree is worthless by the same man whose company now depends on it." He hung up, and I smiled. The next day, the press release hit. My company officially acquired his. The business world buzzed. News outlets praised my bold expansion. LinkedIn exploded. But at home, behind closed doors, My father had to look my mother in the eye and admit he was no longer the patriarch in power. I knew it would sting, but I also knew this. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming everything they tried to shame out of me. The day after the announcement, I received a bouquet of wilting flowers and a note. Let's not turn this into a family war. No name, but I didn't need one. My father had always been more about appearances than sincerity. He wasn't sorry, he was embarrassed. And for the first time, I didn't feel small, I felt free. The ripple effects were immediate. At my father's company, the one now under my control, employees were whispering in the halls. Some were relieved, others were shocked. One intern emailed me saying, "I always knew someone like you would fix this place." I didn't respond, but I smiled. Then came the board meeting. I didn't have to be there in person, but I was. I wore a sleek navy suit, hair tied back, no jewelry except a small pin my mother gave me when I graduated. A pin she later said would look better on someone more successful. I wore it like armor. My father walked in late. He looked tired, smaller. He tried to greet me, but I moved straight into the presentation. Numbers, strategies, new visions. I had the room in the palm of my hand. "Questions?" I asked at the end. One board member leaned forward. "Will Mr. Winters be staying on?" I looked at my father. He stared down at the table. The room went silent. "No," I said clearly. "Effective immediately. He'll transition into an emeritus role. No authority, no operations." There was a beat of silence. Then, applause. Not loud, not showy, but a few sharp claps. Enough. My father stood up and left the room. He didn't say a word to me. That night, I drove past my parents' house. The lights were on. The same porch I used to sit on with textbooks while my father praised my brother's business plans echoed in the quiet. I didn't knock. Instead, I left a sealed envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a photo. Me, shaking hands with Kendrick, both of us smiling under the headline, "The Young CEO Who Changed the Game." On the back, I wrote, "Your daughter didn't need your approval. She needed you to believe in her. You failed at both." I didn't wait for their response. I already had mine. The next morning, my brother posted a passive-aggressive quote on social media. "Real success doesn't need to steal the spotlight." It got 2 likes, both from my parents. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew who had earned their seat and who had inherited one. I poured myself a cup of coffee in the corner office, once reserved for my father, and looked out over the city skyline. The view was the same, but I was not. That day, I called for a scholarship fund to be created, named after my late grandmother, the only person in my family who had ever believed in my potential. She once told me, "Smart girls build bridges while the world's too busy building walls." I was building both now, bridges for those like me and walls to keep the toxic out. Later that week, I got a voicemail from my mom. "Honey, maybe it's time we talk. Maybe dinner?" Her voice was soft, rehearsed, as if she'd forgotten the years I sat alone at award ceremonies while she made excuses about car trouble. I didn't call back. Instead, I sent a box to their house. Inside was my old diploma, the one they once said meant nothing without a husband or connections. I'd framed it, next to the contract naming me CEO, signed by Kendrick himself. My brother tried to show up at the company's holiday gala. He wasn't on the list. Security turned him away at the door. Meanwhile, I walked in that night surrounded by the people who believed in my vision, not my bloodline. There were applause, handshakes, respect, not because of my name, but because of my merit. One investor raised a glass and toasted, "To the girl they underestimated, and to the empire she's building anyway." Everyone clapped. I just smiled, because this wasn't revenge. Weeks later, my parents showed up unannounced at the office. I saw them through the glass wall of my meeting room. My father in a stiff suit that didn't hide the unease on his face. My mother gripping her purse like it held dignity instead of desperation. My assistant knocked gently. "Should I send them away?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "Let them wait," I said calmly, and returned to reviewing pitch decks from women-led startups I was funding. 45 minutes passed before I walked out. "Dad? Mom?" I nodded. "Didn't expect to see you." My father cleared his throat, pretending authority he no longer had. "We just wanted to check in. See how you're doing." I raised an eyebrow. "After you said my degree was worthless? After you laughed when I told you I wanted to start my own firm?" My mother smiled too quickly. "We were just scared for you. The world isn't easy." "No," I said quietly, "but neither were you." They tried to spin their visit into something warm. My dad commenting on the furniture, my mom pointing out how I'd always been the stubborn one. I watched the desperation slip through their charm like cracks in a porcelain plate. And finally, my father said it. "We heard you hired Kendrick. We didn't think you'd actually—" "Replace you?" I finished. "Number, I didn't. You removed yourself the moment you stopped respecting me." Silence. Then I walked them to the elevator myself. As the doors closed, my mom's eyes shimmered, but not with pride, with regret. That weekend, I was invited to speak at my university's alumni event. I returned to the very hall where, years ago, my parents hadn't shown up to my graduation dinner because my brother had a fever. Now they were sitting in the audience, VIP passes, ironically gifted by my executive assistant. The speech I gave wasn't about revenge or success. It was about resilience, and how the most powerful thing a woman can do is stop asking for permission. When I finished, the crowd gave a standing ovation. My father stood too, but slowly, uncertain if he was clapping for his daughter or for the legacy he no longer controlled. Afterward, I posed for photos, this time in the center. Someone handed me a family photo from years ago. I smiled, pulled out a pen, and scribbled one word across it. Rewritten. After the alumni event, my inbox flooded with messages. From students, from women entrepreneurs, even from faculty who once doubted me. But the one message I didn't expect was from Kendrick, my father's ex-boss. It read, "Your father stopped by the office today. He asked if there was any chance I'd consider rehiring him. Thought you should know." I didn't reply immediately. I stared at that sentence for a long while. The man who told me my degree meant nothing now wanted his job back, from the company I'd built, through the man I'd hired. That was poetic, but it didn't make me happy. It made me mourn what could have been, if only they had believed in me. Later that night, I received a video link. It was from my cousin, someone who had always remained neutral. In the video, my brother was hosting a family barbecue. I hadn't been invited. Again. He stood in the center, beer in hand, telling everyone how Dad's company fell apart because he trusted the wrong people. Then he laughed. "But hey, at least the golden girl finally got her little business." Laughter followed. It didn't sting anymore. It just confirmed everything. The next morning, I called Kendrick. "If he applies again," I said, "tell him to put my name on the referral line, but also tell him he'll need to start from the bottom, entry level, like everyone else." That same day, I changed the name of the company. It had been Ward and Grant, named after the family line. I renamed it Eloise Equity. My name, my voice, my journey. And the tagline, "We invest in those they doubted." Billboards went up around the city. Subtle but pointed. My parents couldn't drive anywhere without seeing my face or reading the words that now represented everything they told me I couldn't be. When I finally visited my childhood home again, it wasn't to knock on the door. It was because a new family had moved in. I watched from the car as two little girls played on the lawn, laughing, safe, free. That house was no longer haunted by silence or shame. It had a new story now, just like me. My father emailed me the next week. It was a single line. "I didn't realize you were building an empire." I replied, "You never looked close enough?" I replied, "You never looked close enough." A few days later, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership summit, sponsored by a Fortune 500 company. As I stepped onto the stage, the applause echoed louder than any dinner table silence I'd ever endured. I wore the same necklace my father once told me looked cheap. Under the spotlight, it shimmered like a medal of survival. From the podium, I scanned the audience and thought of the little girl I used to be, the one who waited in the hallway with a report card clutched tightly in her hand, hoping her dad would look up from his beer and say he was proud. He never did, but the crowd of strangers applauding me now, they saw me, and more importantly, I finally saw myself. After my speech, a young woman approached me. She was trembling as she held out a copy of my article and said, "Your story saved mine." I hugged her. I meant it, because in lifting myself, I'd unknowingly built a ladder for others too. That night, I wrote one final message to my father. "I'm not angry anymore, just awake. Thank you for being the storm. It taught me how to build stronger walls and grow flowers inside them." And then I deleted his contact, because I had finally graduated, not from college, but from needing his approval. The day I walked into the office with his former boss trailing behind me, the air shifted. My startup had just acquired their mid-tier tech firm in a quiet deal no one saw coming, least of all my father. I had kept the company name, kept the building, but changed the leadership completely. His son, my brother, the golden boy with the promotion, now reported to my team. And his boss sat across from me in every executive meeting, nodding at my decisions. My father didn't find out through the news. He found out through a phone call from my brother, panicked, stammering, furious. My father barged into my office a week later without an appointment. The receptionist tried to stop him, but I waved her off. I wanted this. He stood in front of me, red-faced. "What game are you playing?" I leaned back in my chair, calm, powerful. "Not a game, a legacy." He looked around the room, the framed press articles, the awards, the photo of my staff smiling during our launch. His gaze settled on a small brass plate on the desk. Founder and CEO, Eva Laurent. That silence? That silence was everything I'd waited for. "I never meant," he began, but I cut him off. "You meant every word," I said. "When you told me I'd never be more than a paper degree girl, when you said your brother knows how the real world works, you meant it. When you laughed at my business idea, when you mocked my seed funding, when you told relatives I was just experimenting with startups like I was playing house. I stood up. You meant it." He looked down. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I whispered. "That's the difference now. I used to want your pride, your blessing, your belief, but I built this without it. So no, I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to see the result of everything you said I couldn't be." Before he left, I handed him a folder. Inside, an offer letter for my brother's boss, the man he respected, admired, and treated like royalty. Hired by me, reporting to me, paid by me. "This is the future," I said. "You can either accept it, or you can keep clinging to your version of the past. Either way, it doesn't stop moving." He left without another word. That night, I celebrated with my team. We popped champagne in the boardroom, but when I got home, I sat in the quiet and let the tears fall. Not of sadness, but of release, of relief. Because the girl who once sat at family dinners being told she was too emotional, too ambitious, too much, had just rewritten the ending, and I wasn't done yet. That night, as the office lights dimmed and the last of my team filed out with laughter and clinking glasses, I stayed behind. I looked around the space I had created from grit, sleepless nights, and the echoes of every dinner table dismissal. The walls weren't just glass. They were memory. They held the silent sobs after rejection emails, the high fives after client wins, and the quiet fury that had fueled every line of code I'd ever written. My phone buzzed. A message from my brother. "Nice power move. Hope you're proud of tearing this family apart." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept an old photo. My father, my brother, and me. Graduation day. I'd been cropped halfway out of the family frame when my dad posted it online. He said it looked cleaner that way. I smiled bitterly, held it for a moment, then gently slid it into the shredder. I didn't need a place in their picture anymore. I had built my own. The next morning, I walked into the office early. The new team was assembling. I handed out fresh ID badges, custom designed, clean, bold, powerful. At the center of everyone, embossed in silver, were the words I wish someone had once said to me, "You belong here." Later that week, a young intern approached me, nervous, hopeful. "I just wanted to say, I saw your interview on the podcast. You made me believe I can actually make it, even if my parents don't see it yet." I smiled, my chest tightening. "You will," I said, "and when you do, don't wait for permission to be proud." Because I had learned the hard way. Validation from others is a leash if you let it be. But belief in yourself, that's a key. And I had finally found the lock it opened. The following week, I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech conference downtown, the same stage where 2 years ago, I'd stood quietly in the back row, taking notes while others spoke. Now, I stood beneath the spotlight, a wireless mic clipped to my lapel, looking out at rows of eager faces, students, founders, mentors, even former bosses. And right in the back row, almost hiding behind a column, was my father. He hadn't told me he was coming. He just sat there, slouched, as if unsure of whether he deserved to be there. I didn't stop the speech. I told the crowd about the dinner tables where daughters were told their dreams were cute, the resumes thrown in drawers, the apologies that never came. I told them about the fathers who believed their sons walked on water, while their daughters had to build their own bridges out of mud and ridicule. I saw my dad flinch when I said, "Sometimes the people who belittle you the most are the ones you once begged to love you right." When I finished, the applause was thunderous, not for revenge, for survival. Afterward, he approached me slowly, like a man walking through fog. He looked older than I remembered, smaller. "You really built something, huh?" he said, more than I ever imagined. I looked at him, not cruelly, but clearly. "You imagined so little." He tried to smile. "Maybe I was wrong." "Maybe?" I asked. He lowered his head. "I was." I didn't hug him. I didn't scream. I just nodded. "Then don't ask me for forgiveness, earn it, every day." He left without another word, and I didn't chase after him. That evening, I lit a candle beside my desk and looked out over the city lights. My mother had texted me earlier too, just a simple heart emoji, and "He watched your whole talk, twice." I didn't reply. Some wounds didn't need to be explained, just witnessed. A few months passed. The company grew beyond what I had dared to imagine. We opened a second office, this time in the very city my father once told me I'd never survive in. One day, during a staff lunch, I noticed a familiar last name on a new intern's resume, Turner. I paused, asked my assistant. It was my cousin's daughter. Apparently, she'd applied without knowing who I was. I interviewed her myself. She sat nervously across from me, probably expecting an icy interrogation. But I didn't give her what our family had given me, I offered kindness, guidance. I gave her a chance, not because they deserved it, but because she didn't deserve to carry their shadows. When she left the interview room, she whispered, "Thank you. No one in our family ever talks about you. But I always wanted to know your side." That stayed with me. One evening, my dad showed up again. This time not at an event, but outside my office. He waited 2 hours in the lobby just to hand me an envelope. "It's not money," he said. "It's memories. Maybe they'll help you understand why I was the way I was." I opened it alone at home. Inside were photos, old Polaroids of me as a child, holding up science fair trophies, reading on the porch, smiling. In every picture, my father was in the background, never smiling, never holding me, but always there, watching, cold, distant, and beneath the photos, a note in his handwriting. "I didn't know how to love what I didn't understand. I was wrong. You weren't weak. You were just stronger than me." It broke me open and stitched me back together in one moment. I didn't call him, but I put one of those photos on my desk, the one where I was holding up my first certificate. I let it remind me, validation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's an echo you waited your whole life to hear. A year later, we were nominated for a National Innovation Award. The ceremony was black tie, the kind of event I used to imagine while buried in textbooks at 2 a.m., fueled only by coffee and defiance. I wore a tailored midnight blue gown, my hair swept up, no longer hiding behind the fear of being too much. When they called my name, the applause echoed through the auditorium. But it wasn't the sound I noticed. It was the silence afterward, the kind that comes when people finally see you. As I stood on stage holding the trophy, I spotted someone in the back of the room, my father. Not at a table, not seated with the elite. He was standing against the far wall in a wrinkled suit jacket, his eyes glassy. He didn't wave, he didn't smile. He just nodded. That nod was heavier than any speech. Later that evening, I stepped outside to breathe. The stars hung low, the city glittered below me, and for the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I was living in the result of my own worth. A tap on my shoulder pulled me back. It was my father's former boss, now my grateful employee, who raised a glass and said, "Thank you for not just hiring me, but showing me what leadership really looks like." I smiled and replied, "Funny. My dad once said my degree meant nothing." The man chuckled. "And now you're the reason his words mean less." When I returned home that night, I passed by the old frame photo of my childhood certificate. I didn't feel the ache anymore. I felt pride, not because I proved them wrong, but because I proved myself right. The girl they said would never match her brother's shadow had become the light. And while my family may never fully apologize, they now watch me shine from the sidelines, squinting in the brilliance they tried to dim. Because in the end, it was never about revenge. It was about reclamation, of my power, of my voice, of the truth. And now, every time someone questions my worth, I don't argue. I just hand them a business card.